Hey, shipmates, welcome back to the Sea Stories and Science Fiction YouTube channel and podcast. I'm your host, Malcolm Torres, and today I want to talk to you about Icebound, Shipwrecked at the Edge of the World by Andrea Bitzer. This came out a year ago. Great story, highly recommended, and I've got a no spoiler review for you here. So hang out for a few minutes and listen and hear this story of history and survival. Two main things going on here: history of navigation and history of the world and history of ships and sailing in the great age of exploration around the 1400s to the 1500s and the early 1600s. That's the time period. The book takes place in the 1590s, and that's 427 years ago. So we've got to kind of paint the picture here. If you look at the map, like I've got here on the screen, this is what we know of the world today. Pretty well known. Major continents: North and South America, Europe, Eastern Europe, Russia, Asia, the whole South Asian archipelago, Australia and Africa. I mean, we know where everything is today. But back then, there were a lot of blank spaces on the map. Like, here's an example of a map that was relevant around the 1590s, and they kind of have an idea where North America and South America are, but they don't know what's beyond that. And then up at the top, like, they have no idea what's up there, and down south at the bottom, no idea what's down there. And then a lot of Asia and the Pacific Ocean, these European map makers were just purely speculating. It's really important to get your brain into the context of these really intelligent, scientific mariners, at that time in the 1590s. Smart, brave, very adventurous sailors, but they just didn't know. Like, today, we take it for granted that we've got pictures from outer space of the planet. We can see it all. Like, oh yeah, that's it. A little kid in school can look at it and be like, yep, there's the Earth. There's the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean. There's all the continents, no problem. But back then, like, they just didn't know. They had no idea. And to me, that's an interesting concept. But like, what does that really mean? Like, give me some factual context for that. So here, let's take a look at the map. And again, remember, this is the map that we know today. Back then, they didn't know all this. So this book takes place in 1594. And the main character, this guy, William Barents, he believes that there is a passage where he can go north and either right over the top of the world or across the top of what's today known as Russia, and then drop into the area around China and Japan and go swing around to all of, like, what today is like Vietnam and Korea and Thailand, all of that South Asian archipelago. He believes he can get there that way, and there are quite a few others who believe it too, but they're just not sure. Okay, fine. But think about it like this. In 1492, 100 years earlier, Columbus kind of had the same idea, but he just figured you can go straight out across the Atlantic and go around to India that way. And he ran into North America. He didn't know it at the time. That's why Native Americans are often referred to as Indians, because Columbus thought he was in India and the natives were Indians. So just fun facts there, right? So then you've got the years 1500 to 1540. The Portuguese are very adventurous, very skilled at navigation, and they go south around Africa. And you can see if you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see these maps, like, in 1500 they went to here, and then in 1505, and then 1510, 1520, and 1530, and 1540, they finally send all these expeditions, and they go all the way around Africa, and they're all up in India and the South Asian archipelago, and they make it all the way up to Japan and even to places in China. But that was from like 1500 to 1540. So in the midst of all that, in around the 1520s, Magellan leaves Europe and goes south across the Atlantic and goes around Cape Horn, around the southern tip of South America, and goes across the Pacific Ocean, Hawaii, the Philippines. Magellan is killed in the Philippines. But the rest of his party with his crew and his ships continue on, and they cross into the Indian Ocean, and they go around the Cape of Good Hope from east to west and come up the coast of Africa and are declared like this is the first circumnavigation of the world. And this is all accomplished in the 1520s. So you've got all this stuff going on, and now go a little bit further forward into 1594, okay? And here's the Dutch in Amsterdam and what is today the Netherlands, and they're feeling left out and they're feeling kind of beat up. They want a piece of the action. They want to get to Asia with their ships and their sailors and their map makers. They want to get there, and they want to start to trade. The traders and the wealthy in the Netherlands, they want to trade with Asia. So they try to go south, and they end up getting challenged pretty heavily by the Portuguese, because the Portuguese have the maps and they're keeping great secrets, and they know how to get down the coast of Africa and around up into Asia. So William Barents, the main character in this story, he pulls together a consortium of wealthy traders and ship's captains, and they outfit several wooden ships, and their plan is to head north. They believe that if they go up north, that there's ice, but they're going to find warm water, and they're going to be able to go right over the top of the world to China, or they're going to be able to go across over the top of Russia and to China. But they don't really know, right? They don't know what's up there. They don't know what's beyond like a certain point. So we'll get into that in just a minute. The book is filled with all of these awesome little stories and vignettes and kind of, explanations of the history of navigation, including the use of the compass, the sextant, the clock, the development of longitude and latitude, which is fascinating, and also the use of the sun and the stars to navigate. So if you like that kind of thing, you'll really be into this story, because she talks to the author, Andrea Pitzer. She gives you all these great examples, and even goes back to the very early, the Arabs and the Muslims, how they developed the sextant and they could navigate, and then the Europeans kind of built on it a little more, and just the whole development of what became modern navigation, right? Using the stars and the sun and the sextant and the compass, and using longitude and latitude. So that's all really fleshed out, but it's not like science-y and like nerdy history. It's told through stories, mainly sea stories, and that's where I really enjoyed it. So in summary of this kind of first half of the book review, you've got a lot of history, and in my opinion, what it comes down to is there's this history of the blank places on the map, and these European sailors are filling it in. And Barents is the guy who wants to figure out what's north. He's got this penchant to get through the ice fields and around the icebergs and figure out a way to get to China by going north. Now, we know today, looking back, that was a fool's errand, but again, back then they didn't know. And these were brave, smart, mostly men, and they went for it. And they paid a dear price. Barents gets 3 missions, and then we get into the issues of survival. Now, if you've been watching my reviews, you know that I don't do spoilers. I'll tell you a few minor things about this book, the plot, and some of the elements that make it interesting, but I'm not going to spoil anything for you. To provide some context here, when I saw this book in the bookstore, I was like intrigued, Shipwrecked, boom, I'm interested. But then, right inside the front cover, a great map, and you can see down here Amsterdam, and you've got Norway and Sweden and Russia and the Arctic Circle. And what you learn right away is that they go north and they go up to this area, and on 1, 2, 3 expeditions, and finally William Barents, who is just bound and determined to figure out how to get through the ice to Asia. He pushes all the way up here around Nova Zembla, and they get stuck in the ice. And now it's a story of survival. Again, I'm not going to tell you, who lives and dies and how they survive and all that stuff, but I can tell you that there are shipwrecks, there are collisions, there are ships that run aground. They discover islands that had never been discovered before. They see huge numbers of polar bears and Arctic foxes and birds, walruses, seals. So it's really cool to be like in the story and in the moment and being a sailor exploring this part of the world and seeing all these places for the first time. They are dealing with scurvy and malnutrition pretty heavily, and they have to survive in just this harsh climate for many months. It's dark, it's cold, and it's brutal because the polar bears want to eat you, and they do in fact attack and kill several of the sailors. So there's also some unknown natives in these areas up there, not in Nova Zembla, but around, the northern part of what today is Europe and Russia, which, by the way, if you go in on Google Earth or Google Maps and just really look at it, you'll see that this is still like some of the most desolate, barren, frozen, windswept, difficult terrain to try and navigate in, never mind having to survive after a shipwreck. So just a great story of survival and the history of navigation. I want to provide a couple of other little factoids for context. In my reading experience, the gold standard for survival of a shipwreck in a freezing climate was Ernest Shackleton's Endurance. Anybody who's into this type of literature is going to know this story. And if you haven't heard of this story, you're going to go out and buy this book and read it soon once I tell you about it. But Endurance was the story of Shackleton's incredible voyage. And Shackleton is trying to get to the South Pole, and he gets stuck in the ice. And Shackleton and his crew go through this incredible journey of survival. And the whole time that I was reading Icebound, I kept thinking like, oh yeah, Shackleton, very similar story. Like they get stuck in the ice, they have to survive. But then I went, wait a minute, hold on a second. What years are we talking about here? We're talking 1594, okay? 420 something years ago. And then I looked it up and I'm like, Shackleton, hold on a minute. Shackleton's story takes place in 1914. And I'm thinking, 1914, these guys have got technology. I mean, do they have I couldn't remember off the top of my head, but like 1594, 427 years ago versus 1914, which is like 100 years ago. So there's like a 400-year difference. And so when I finished reading this, it was like, boom, you just knocked Shackleton out of the winner of the, sailors surviving the Arctic challenge, right? Both great books. I'm joking around here, but both great books. But this is like the original story. And I'm wondering, like, how did Andrea Pitzer get all this? And I'm reading between the lines, and I'm looking in the back of the book at the fine print where she starts to really call out her sources. And she's got, and I researched this. There was some really good articles in the New York Times, and there's some interviews and some articles about Andrea Pitzer and the really great research that she's done and what a great writer she is. But she's got manuscripts that have never been translated from the original Dutch. And they were translated, I think one of them for her by another researcher. There's Diederik Wildman's Who Was William Barents, translated into English for the author in December of 2018. So it's like, ooh, this is like really good source material. And there's also Gerrit de Veer, The Three Voyages of William Barents to the Arctic Regions, which had been translated prior, but you're like, oh, so she's got really great sources here. And she's citing them, but she's also got some other great sources. The Fletcher Bassett's Legends and Superstitions of the Sea and of Sailors in All Lands and at All Times, published in London in 1885. Sounds like some great material for future episodes of the Sea Stories and Science Fiction podcast, huh? Thank you, Andrea Pitzer. And then also a book here that she references, William Dean Howells and Thomas Sargent Perry's Library of Universal Adventure by Sea and Land, published in 1888. Thank you, Andrea Pitzer, for that one. I'll definitely be diving into that. And several other really deep resources that she's got there. So Andrea Pitzer single-handedly researches and writes this Arctic survival story, hence, boom, right on the shelf next to Shackleton. Another story of Arctic survival that kind of parallels this one a little bit, but again, not the original, was the story of the Franklin expedition in the 1840s. A British expedition trying to find its way across northern Canada to get to the Pacific Ocean. And these two ships that the British completely outfitted and sent over there disappeared in the northern Canadian, waterways up there, never to be discovered where they truly ended up. And I think there might have been some documentaries just recently on those. And again, the Franklin expedition. But again, those are not until the 1840s. So again, to wrap this up, Andrea Pitzer, huge props, much respect for all the research and your literary chops and journalistic techniques and your historical acumen in writing this outstanding story of William Barrett's Icebound, Shipwrecked at the Edge of the World. And before I let you go, again, I would ask that you tune in here, hit subscribe and like, and drop some comments down there if you've read Icebound, if you have other books in a similar vein that you'd like to shout out, if you want to quiz me or chastise me for any reason, please drop it in the comments down there. I'm Malcolm Torres. I host this Sea Stories and Science Fiction YouTube channel. I also have a podcast. As of right now, I've got 35 stories on the podcast of stories from the Age of Sail with mermaids, pirates, shipwrecks, mutiny, being lost at sea, practical jokes, adventures in foreign ports. So thanks for joining me, and I look forward to meeting you online on Facebook and Instagram, Goodreads, LinkedIn, and Twitter. I'm on all of those social networks as Malcolm Torres, Sea Stories, and Science Fiction.